Hello, Endeavor here. So, as you know by now, Donald Trump has won the 2024 US presidential election, and the results came in just a few days ago, and I'm gonna do a quick video here to give my thoughts on the election, the turnout, and what we can look for and what we can possibly expect from a second Donald Trump presidency. I was somewhat surprised by the results. Throughout this year in the summer, I thought he had a good chance of winning, but then towards the fall, I thought that he probably wouldn't win. But then the last couple of weeks before the election, I started getting more confident that he would win again, but he won by a lot wider of a margin than I expected. So I wasn't shocked that he won the election, but I was surprised by how much he won it by. So what are some of my initial feelings over the results? I'm happy with the results overall. I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, as you'll know from my previous video, but I think he was the best of the two options available. So I think that the outcome of the United States election was the best one possible for both the United States and the rest of the world. Now, I need to make it clear from the get-go that Trump is not a savior. He's not going to be an explicitly pro-white president. And he's not going to save the United States or the world single-handedly. And I'm sure that over the next 4 years, there will be many criticisms which will have to be directed against Trump. But having said that, I think that there are some potential positives which could come about from a second Trump term. So keep in mind that throughout this video, I'm not saying that Trump is a savior, that he's our guy, or that he's perfect in any way. And I'm not saying that about any of the individuals I'm going to discuss. So if I get any comments accusing me of lauding Trump or whoever as a savior, I'm just going to block you because it gets really irritating having to repeat myself over and over again. So the first major positive takeaway from Trump's second electoral victory is that it shows that by now, the majority of people have tuned out libtard hysteria from the mainstream media. In the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the election, there were a record number of articles claiming that Trump was a fascist and comparing him to Mustache Man and trying to beat on the drum of the hysteria and conjure up images of movies like Schindler's List in people's minds. Basically appealing to the post-war morality that fascism and Nazism and racism are the greatest evils possible and that, well, Trump is one of them and you can't possibly support Trump because he's going to bring about the Third Reich again. He's the reincarnation of Mustache Man. The left's tactic of fear-mongering that anything right-wing will inevitably lead to concentration camps and genocide and it'll bring us back to 1930s and recreate the Third Reich, I think that this tactic has lost its effectiveness. Now, Trump's first victory was a sign that it was starting to lose its effectiveness, but it still did remain an extremely potent weapon. A lot fewer mainstream people endorsed Trump the first time around, basically because they were afraid of being associated with these kinds of accusations. The second time, a lot more mainstream people were able to actually voice their support for him. The other thing this shows is that the mainstream media has just become totally incompetent, because just think for a second that the best they could come up with in the home stretch 2-3 weeks before the election, when they're trying desperately to get Kamala Harris elected and to vilify Trump in whatever way they can, the best they could come up with is Trump is Hitler. There's nothing less creative imaginable than that. Everyone just rolls their eyes now when they hear the words Hitler, Trump, fascism, Nazism. It's really lost all effectiveness. And the positive of that is that it makes people a lot more comfortable considering right-leaning ideas, but also a lot more comfortable to consider pro-white ideas, because this accusation has been used against people to the right of Trump as well, and very effectively over the course of several decades. You can't forget how much work was done to kind of build 1930s Germany and fascism up as the ultimate evil in the minds of the public, and how effective that has been at dissuading people from actually embracing many of our ideas. It just isn't effective anymore. People now just roll their eyes and groan when you bring it up. They don't actually feel this deep fear and this deep shame that they're doing something evil. I also think that Trump's second victory signals that progressivism or wokeism has passed its peak. There were already a lot of signs of this, but I think that this will cement it. I don't think wokeness, so to say, is going to just go away tomorrow. It certainly won't, but I don't think we're going to see the craziness of 2020 or 2021 again. I'd say that 2020 with BLM, that was peak wokeness in its aggression, but you also have to remember that 2016 onwards, the left became a lot more aggressive. And I guess you can also put that to 2014 with the Great Awakening. But there was so much more momentum behind progressive politics in 2015, certainly than there is now. Someone like Barack Obama, he doesn't, at least in his first term, he doesn't seem particularly woke by today's standards. But the idea that he's this hero because he's the first non-white president, that is wokeism. That is anti-whiteism. But this was seen at the time as this monumentally important thing. And it was the same with Hillary Clinton, the potential for her to be the first female president. That was seen as just monumentally significant, that it was this great step in the right direction for progress and equality and democracy, that a woman could now be president. Kamala Harris, she's both non-white and she's a woman, but no one was excited about her and the prospect of her being the first both female and the first non-white female president. There were some who were, but that was a very poor selling point for Kamala Harris and her campaign, and her campaign actually didn't play that up nearly as much as Barack Obama's campaign played up the fact that he was non-white in 2008, and the extent to which Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 played up the fact that she was a woman. And I think the cause of this is that progressive universalist egalitarianism, it's really just being confronted by hard reality, and nothing demonstrates that better than Kamala Harris herself. She's a total mediocrity. Everyone can see from space that the only reason that she ever reached the heights that she did in her career is that she's a diversity hire. In 2020, when she ran in the Democratic primaries, she was one of the least popular candidates, and the only reason that Biden made her or the people running Biden's campaign, I don't think he has the mental capacity to make any of these decisions, but the only reason the Biden campaign made her the VP was because they wanted someone who was non-white and a woman. The Democrats were forced to eat crow following that debate between Biden and Trump in June of this year, where Biden was just clearly out of it. They had been spending months and months saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with him, his mental state is perfectly fine, and then he humiliates himself, and then the very next day they're saying, okay, yeah, we need someone to replace him. Well, I mean, at that late stage of the game, the only person they had available was Kamala Harris, the person who was made VP for the sole reason that she ticked the diversity boxes that they wanted. So they were left with someone who was extremely unpopular, even among their own voting base, and who was just clearly incompetent. And Kamala Harris herself is the perfect embodiment of the incompetence, dysfunction, and malevolence which progressive politics create. I mean, look at how the Biden administration actually operated. So think about how many people they let across the border. Think about how they were spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars on all these refugees who are coming into their country illegally, but then they have nothing to give to actual Americans who are the victims of these hurricanes in the southern United States. Think of how they're shipping Haitians into these towns in Ohio, these small towns with only a couple tens of thousands of people. They're putting thousands of Haitians into these towns and basically just telling the people if they have any problem with it, well, then they're racist. You just look at the people who they put into power, people like that transgender Jewish man, woman, Rachel Levine or whatever. I mean, it's just a freak show. And I really think that just for anyone within the elite class, this is a reality which you have to confront. Because regardless of what your ideological priors are, you're not going to be able to run a functional society if your main goal is not competence, but simply getting rid of white people, that is the purpose of progressivism. So there's that debate between Academic Agent and Orrin McIntyre about is woke being put away, so to say. AA's argument is that it is being put away. Orrin said that it isn't. You know, I do think that AA is probably going to be right that we're going to see less of it going forward. But I guess where I would disagree with him on this is that I don't think this is really like a Machiavellian move on the part of the elite class. I think it's more just that they're being confronted by hard reality. Because as Harold Robertson wrote about in his now viral article on the competence crisis, if you deprioritize merit in favor of diversity, which, as we know, just means getting rid of white people, you're not going to be able to maintain the infrastructure of an advanced first world country for very long. So I do think that Trump is going to roll back a lot of the Biden administration's initiatives on wokeness, both in the public sector, and I think the private sector will also roll back on this stuff too. And I think that the overall effect of that is that a lot of talented young white men will be given the opportunities which they actually deserve, instead of being passed over in favor of non-whites solely based on their race. Now, for Trump to fully eliminate what we call wokeness, he would need to repeal the Civil Rights Act, which I can't imagine him doing. So you'll still have that. It will still be a thing, but you'll probably see a lot less of it under Trump. Some people make the argument that over-the-top wokeness and DEI and all of this stuff actually helps us because it wakes people up to the problem, but I totally disagree with this. In the real world, what actually happens is that young white people are denied the opportunities they deserve. This makes them less likely to rise to elite status, and it usually makes them depressed and demoralized. They very often develop mental illnesses. So no over-the-top wokeness, cramming ideology down people's throats. It's not going to cause a massive reaction. All it's going to do is just demoralize people. So this stuff being rolled back is a positive thing, and I hope that Trump rolls as much of it back as possible. Now, something which overlaps with this is Trump and the tech bros. Now, this is probably the issue which I'm the most interested in seeing what's going to happen, because this doesn't only affect the United States, but the entire world. So in his first term as president, as we know, Trump was very disappointing on this issue, and he really didn't take it seriously. But as we all know, Trump is an egomaniac, and he's someone who thinks about himself first and foremost. Let's be honest here. He wasn't affected by it during his first term, which is why I think he really didn't take the issue seriously. And I think that that's really the reason that he did pretty much nothing about tech censorship throughout his first term as president. But in 2021, he was personally banned from Twitter. The only reason he was allowed back on is because Elon Musk bought the platform. It's probably also the only reason that Trump had any platform which was really friendly to him during his election campaign, so that might have actually won it for him. At least it certainly helped. The relationship between Trump and Musk is certainly an interesting one. Musk is also not our guy. He's not a white nationalist. He's not explicitly pro-white or anything. He's a classical liberal Gen Xer who has become disaffected by the overreaches of leftist progressivist policy. And I do think he is genuinely opposed to wokeism and the worst of anti-white policies, even though he isn't explicitly pro-white. Musk's son was brainwashed into becoming transgender, so you have to imagine that he has a chip on his shoulder. But beyond that, his dream is to take humanity to Mars. DEI policies are destroying the elite human capital of the West, which will prevent him from ever doing that. For example, last year, SpaceX was sued by the US government for discriminating against refugees by not hiring enough asylum seekers. Woke managerialism will prevent him from ever achieving his dreams. So his endorsement of Trump does make sense from that perspective, and I think that Musk really does understand how vital free speech is to his own goals. While X is not a free speech platform 100%, it's not free from any censorship. It's a lot better now than Twitter was between 2017 and 2022. And I do think that that was instrumental to Trump's win. So Musk is the most prominent tech tycoon to go rogue and endorse Trump. And there was also Peter Thiel, who did the first time around as well. What's interesting to look at, it might not have been as significant as what Musk did, but it's interesting to look at what some other tech oligarchs did during this election cycle. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, he didn't endorse Trump, and he's certainly not going to ever be pro-white, I think mostly due to his Jewish background, but he's not as in lockstep with the establishment as he had been from 2015 to 2023. So Zuckerberg didn't endorse Trump, but he didn't endorse Kamala Harris either. And that's a big change because Meta Platforms has been in lockstep with the left for years at this point. And Mark Zuckerberg has actually rolled back some of that too. So he recently apologized for censoring news on behalf of the Biden administration during the pandemic. And he said that he's going to hire more conservative consultants to help repair Meta's relationship with the right. Zuckerberg also recently said that he now identifies as a libertarian, so take from that what you will. But he definitely, I wouldn't say has joined the right per se, but what it means is that he's not in lockstep with the progressive establishment as he had been for quite a few years. Another interesting development is with Jeff Bezos. So recently, just before the election, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who also owns the Washington Post, wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post saying that the publication won't endorse any candidate for the first time since the 1970s. I believe that the Washington Post has endorsed the Democrat candidate in every single election dating back to when Jimmy Carter was running. What Bezos said in his article is that a newspaper endorsing a candidate doesn't actually get any more people to support that candidate. All it does is it just reveals that this newspaper is partisan. And what he talked about was the fact that the mainstream media, including the Washington Post, which he owns, has lost all its credibility, and rightfully so in my opinion, because it's now just viewed as flagrantly partisan propaganda. And funny enough, this alone, not even endorsing Trump or anything, just saying that the Washington Post wouldn't endorse anyone and that they're trying to be less politically partisan, that already had plenty of libtards, like Stephen King, for example, screeching on social media, screaming about how they're going to cancel their subscription to the Washington Post. I mean, it just goes to show how unhinged the left really has become. The fact that simply not endorsing anyone can now get them to accuse you of being an apologist for fascism. It's also been reported that Bezos instructed the Washington Post to hire more conservative columnists to balance out the perspectives of the Washington Post. Now, I don't think it's going to be anyone who's super based, so to say, but what it does show is that the Washington Post, Bezos, like Zuckerberg, not to the extent of someone like Musk, but they aren't in lockstep unison with the establishment as they were for quite a few years. So big tech is not as woke now as it was in 2021, and it makes sense why. If you're a tech tycoon like Musk, Zuckerberg, or Bezos, your business empire relies on a high degree of competence and innovation, which the very nature of woke managerialism erodes. They have to ask themselves if they want to continue their lavish lifestyles as tech, playboy, billionaire tycoons and achieve their lifelong ambitions, like for Musk going to Mars, or whether they want to throw all that away in pursuit of egalitarian delusions. And this ties into the free speech issue because not only in the United States but around the world, almost all discourse on the internet, meaning almost all discourse at all these days, flows through big tech. You basically need this to have any kind of counter-narrative possible. Now, I don't think that the internet is nearly as free as it was in 2016 before they really tried to crack down after Trump's first election victory, but it is a lot more free than it was before Musk took over Twitter in 2022. And I'm hoping that during Trump's second presidency, seeing as he was actually a victim of the big tech crackdown back in 2021, I'm hoping that that incentivizes him, and that and his relationship with Musk incentivizes him to take this issue a lot more seriously and pass through legislation in the United States which requires these platforms to adhere to certain free speech principles and not just be as flagrantly partisan as they've been for 6-7 years. I think this is probably what I'm the most hopeful for in Trump's second term, because this affects the entire world. It's not just the United States. The next issue is foreign policy. So with Trump's foreign policy, I think that the best we can hope for is that he'll be able to bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war sooner. I think that the best outcome of that conflict, in my opinion, is whatever brings the war to an end in the fastest and least bloody manner possible. The only way that I think that's going to happen is through some kind of peace deal. Neither side is going to get everything they want, but they'll both probably be able to declare a partial victory. Now, I think some people are a bit too optimistic on this. The war between Russia and Ukraine is not going to end immediately as Trump gets into office in January. But I do think that it's more likely to end sooner and it's less likely to escalate with Trump in office, which I think is the optimal solution. Ultimately, it'll be up to the Russians and Ukrainians to agree upon a peace deal, but I think that Trump is probably a lot more likely to try to broker a deal than the Biden administration was. Can you imagine if the person in the White House trusted with the big red nuclear missile button were Kamala Harris? With the other big geopolitical conflict right now in the Middle East, I'm a lot less optimistic about Trump's impact. Trump is an avowed Zionist, and unfortunately, America's blank check to Israel is most likely going to continue under Trump. And I think that if Israel were to escalate with Iran, Trump would probably go along with it. I hope I'm wrong on that, but I think that he would. So his support for Israel is obviously a negative about Trump, but in this election, the issue was a wash. While Kamala Harris might have been less vocal in her support for Israel to avoid alienating segments of the Democrat base, she'd pretty much be as equally beholden to the Zionist lobby. She'd probably just be less vocally enthusiastic about it. I mean, remember that Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish. So the Zionist lobby remains in total control of both the Democrat and Republican parties. I'm optimistic that over the next decade or two, Israel will lose its unconditional support from the US and the rest of the West, as both young Democrats and young Republicans oppose the relationship. But since American politicians are almost all boomers, Israel's stranglehold on American foreign policy remains. Trump isn't good on the issue, but he isn't any worse than the alternative. The vast majority of American Jews voted Harris. I think it was about 80% of them, meaning they weren't worried about Israel losing its blank check support from the United States with her as president. Now, the big issue, which is going to really determine whether Trump's second presidency will be a success or not, is immigration. The worst aspect of Trump is that he's not hard enough on legal immigration. He said during his campaign that he would staple green cards to diplomas and that he wanted to bring a lot more people into the United States because of AI. I don't understand the reasoning there. And that's a horrible policy because in Canada, for example, my country, a lot of the immigrants have got into the country through these student visas. So this is a major part of the Great Replacement in Canada. And, the fact that Trump says he's going to hand out green cards to graduating students is a really bad policy. While illegal immigration is a problem for both the US and other Western countries, legal immigration is an even bigger problem. I don't have much faith in Trump to tackle that issue for the American public. I'm fairly certain that the US will continue to receive replacement-level immigration under Trump, though I think it'll probably be less than under Harris. Where he might be better is on the issue of illegal immigration. During his first term, about the same number of illegals entered the country as had under Obama's second term, so he performed quite poorly on that issue his first time in office. However, the number of illegals the U.S. received under Biden dwarfed both those under Obama and Trump. Trump promised mass deportations of illegals during his campaign. The truth is that the U.S. needs deportations of both illegals and legals, but deporting illegals would be good for a start. Whether or not this will actually happen is uncertain. The most important thing you guys in the US can do is you need to hold Trump's feet to the fire on this issue. If he's not pressured into doing it, it might not happen. But if he actually does feel pressure to do it, then it could happen. And even if it's not the numbers which he was promising during his campaign, some is better than none. As for how us non-Americans can look at this, for better or for worse, the world follows after the United States, especially the Western world. If deportations of a large number of illegals actually happens in the US, it makes it more likely for other countries to seriously consider doing the same. It would legitimize the idea of remigration in Western countries. Eventually, remigration of both illegals and legals needs to be legitimized, but it would be a start. I also feel that if Western peoples just get a taste of remigration, we would just want more and more of it, which is why they don't want to allow us to have that. The argument that mass third world immigration is of any benefit whatsoever is quickly losing any credibility. I'm confident that if we were allowed to see the impacts of remigration, it would be a selling point immediately. But in order for that to happen, Trump's feet need to be held to the fire. He needs to feel the pressure to actually follow through on this promise because he's been a disappointment on this before. So in conclusion, my expectations for Trump's second presidency aren't extremely high, but I think there is some potential here for some positives to be gained. The two big issues that Americans really need to press him on are free speech on the internet and immigration. Without pressure, I think he's going to fail to deliver again, but if he feels that he really needs to, he might actually deliver on some of these promises. He might also be able to bring about some more geopolitical stability, so he might have some benefits for foreign policy as well. Something to look out for is if Trump pardons the J6 protesters. If he does that as soon as he gets into office, you can probably expect some positives from his presidency, because it probably means that he's a lot more serious this time around. If he doesn't, that's not a good sign. So that's something to keep an eye on. Trump's not a savior in any way, and I intend to criticize him and his crew when they fail to deliver on something, but I think him winning is definitely the better of the two outcomes. I will say that I really did enjoy watching the meltdowns on social media on Wednesday, both with the libtards throwing their temper tantrums about how fascism is coming to the United States, that Americans voted for fascism, and also the cope from people like Nick Fuentes and the Groyper crowd, and the salt from the Wignats, TRS, Richard Spencer, and from the NAFO, neocons, Slava Ukraine types as well. The outbursts from the left and the worst of the right have been quite entertaining to see. But I enjoyed that for a day, and today's just another day at the office, and my goals haven't changed at all. It's not time to celebrate anything, but just time to continue the work. So onwards and upwards. Talk to you later. Thanks for listening.